Welcome to The Life of Hair. My name's James Atkinson. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Now, in this week's episode, we're going to take a look at a colour correction. It's a balayage ultimately, but we are in a state of colour correction. Now, when we are dealing with colour corrections, as I'm sure we all know at this point in time, that we can't always get everything done that we want to do to the hair in one go. Now, this being said, these are the things that we need to talk to our clients about in the consultation. Open, honest, transparent consultations are the backbone of a successful hair appointment, especially from the standpoint of achieving something that may not fit the brief 100% of the client's needs. So in this particular episode, we're going to take a really close look at the start of a journey with me and this particular client. This was filmed when we went back to work after lockdown 2.0 in November here in the UK. So it was around Christmas time. And for me, it was kind of a case of helping this lady start the journey. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole backstory, but you'll see for yourself what it looked like when she came to me. We can talk a little bit about that as we go through the journey. But it's really, for me, explaining to the client very early on in the journey, right at that very, very first consultation, that this is not going to happen overnight. And that in reality, it's going to take a little bit of time for you to be able to help them to get to the goals they'd like to achieve. So if you enjoy this episode, please do me the massive favour, hitting that thumbs up button, subscribing if you haven't already, and chat to me down in the comments section. Have a wonderful week, and on with today's episode. So this is what we started with. A very, very orangey, warm colour. This was actually coloured like this by somebody else, and this lady really, really wanted me to help her with her colouring issues. Now, what she really wanted was a balayage effect. The biggest problem for me here was the lack of contrast in the colour. There was no contrast to create separation and dimension. So this is a super easy fix to a greater degree, and as I mentioned in the intro, actually eventually she'd like to create a little bit more lightness in the hair, but the hair had become very sensitized from the previous colouring experience. I'm not exactly sure how the hair had become that way because they actually hadn't managed to lift it an awful lot, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about how we fix these problems. So the biggest thing was getting the darker colour back into the hair. So it was a very simple technique to do, and I'm going to just give you a quick heads up on my thoughts and processes and rationales when dealing with this in the consultation. Obviously, when you get a consultation come in and you're faced with a whole new set of challenges, one of the big things is to really determine exactly what that client wants from you in terms of the initial service, because sometimes we can't achieve what the client wants from you. And that's not your own fault, that's just the nature of hair. Sometimes we can only take the hair so far. So in this particular instance, I'm using bleach, blue powder bleach, and 10 volume on the back and 20 volume on the front. The reason I'm using 10 volume in the back is because I know it's going to be on a bit longer. I'm probably going to need to rinse it out altogether because of the general nature of this technique. The secondary colour that I've used, the low light colour, is Redken Shades EQ 06N with a tiny little bit of 06T. T is a titanium violet shade, and that titanium is basically blue, and that is to counteract the orange that we're seeing in the hair. But I don't want to kill it right down flat because inevitably I'm going to leave warmth in the hair because I'm not using a very strong peroxide to ensure tons of lift and then really make sure that I'm going to get the hair as light as humanly possible. No, I've not promised that in the consultation. I've promised that I will retain the integrity and the quality of her hair as best as I can in the circumstances. Now, I'm most definitely using Olaplex in this service, and it really obviously massively helps to retain condition and make sure we make the best of each hair service that we do. But remember guys, it's really important that you use Olaplex number 3, as I'm about to discuss over on my other channel, The Life of Hair Reviews. So make sure you go over there to check that out. So this technique, you can probably see as you've been watching and listening to me, it's super simple to do. We're taking about 1.5 inch sections, maybe closer to 1 inch on most of them, but we're just varying them. We're not being too precise, too accurate with the size of our sections here. There's no need. We want enough contrast and separation between the highlights and the lowlights in this particular look to really ensure that we're going to see some definite low lighting and some contrast between the lightest pieces and the darkest pieces, because effectively what this technique is lacking most of all is dark pieces in the ends. And we'll see in the end result, obviously, that we've achieved that very nicely. And dropping it down to a 6 is not exactly as dark as this lady is naturally, but we're getting there. We're getting close to how dark she was naturally. When I put the level finder on her hair, she was a level 5 with an ash tone. Now, you know, it's difficult to see when we're looking on screens, all different, you know, iPhone screens versus Samsung screens versus whoever's screens, Huawei, they all look a bit different. But obviously, we do obviously need to bear in mind that when we are dealing with people's colours and their natural colour may not be to their taste, we might have to alter that natural colour. Now, in the instance of this particular technique, there was no way in a colour corrective process was I going to alter the base colour of my client's hair. We can do that next time. We don't make work that adds extra stress and complication to what is already something that you're not exactly going to nail the brief, because I knew I wasn't going to nail the brief 100% because I wasn't going to get it as cool as she initially liked the idea of being. That would have had to have been done in the very first instance, but unfortunately that didn't happen, so here I am correcting it. So let's talk a little bit about the technique and the way that I'm going about doing this colour. I've just taken a 1 inch sized section and I'm taking deep weaves up and down throughout the hair, creating effectively little triangles of hair. So in the top of this section, I had 4 little triangles of hair, which I've clipped up out the way. And then I will pick up the bottom of this section and I will apply my low light formula to the bottom strands and my highlight formula to my top strands. My low light will then sit in between my highlight sections, but my highlight will be on top, the dominant color, if you will. And this technique is massively easy to do, and a technique that I actually use an awful lot, even if I'm not lightening pieces. For instance, if I want to do a reverse balayage and I want to tone the blonde hair that I'm leaving behind, instead of using bleach, I'll just use another tone, a blonde tone, a different shade to neutralize or enhance. So you can use this technique in lots and lots of different ways. It can be used as a reverse balayage technique, or alternatively we can use it in the way that you're seeing here right now. So in terms of the lightening in this particular technique, super simple, super easy to do. And what we do is we heavily saturate our ends. We'll then use a comb to make sure the bleach has gone all the way through the section, because we're going to fully saturate at least half of the hair. And then we're going to use the palm of our hand to distribute the product up the hair, and this is going to change the saturation. What does that mean for anybody that doesn't know what that means? What that means is, if you think of this like buttering a piece of toast, you get your knife, you pick up your butter, it hits the toast and it starts to go thick at one end, thin to the other. We're using that exact same premise, thick down towards the ends of the hair and thinner up towards the root area, to ensure that we get maximum saturation transition to create the most beautiful blends up towards the root area. We then need to apply lots and lots of bleach to the ends to ensure that we get maximum lift, because we're only using 10 volume, as I mentioned in the beginning. But we obviously want that 10 volume to do as best a job as it humanly can. So we still want to go back over and resaturate, and then I'm placing a foil on top of that section or folding it by 50%, dependent on the needs of the client and the individual's hair, length, etc. In this particular instance, it's absolutely fine to fold by 50%. But if I wanted maximum lift up by the root area, then I would sandwich another foil on top. As you can see, the transition area is being left at the top of the foil. But it's okay because I don't want that area to lift that much anyway, because I want it to seamlessly gradiate from what is quite a lot darker natural color down to through the ends that is quite a lot lighter. Obviously, it's only got to kind of a level 8 at the moment. It's got that very, very gold yellow vibe to it. So we're in that kind of 8 realm between a 7 and an 8. And so all we need to do is lift it up kind of a couple of shades and tone it, which we'll talk about at the end of this video. But, you know, it's really, really important that we put ourselves on a platform that we can kind of then correct any warmth that would be left behind, because we can guarantee you when you've got hair that's lifted like this, it actually is more difficult to lift the second time than it would have been the first time to get it done perfectly the first time round. Now, I'm not sure about the science behind that, but I just have found that throughout my entire career. When something's been coloured previously and not got the levels of lift required in the first place, subsequently it can be more challenging to create the look that you're trying to get the second time, especially in fairly short succession. If the hair's had time to kind of rebuild and re-strengthen, it seems to lift somewhat a bit better. But in this particular instance, I always find that once I'm in this particular scenario, I never promise a huge amount of lift. I know that if I am in this particular scenario, then I can end up in a lot of trouble if I promise too much lift, because obviously ultimately it's quite light, and so I know it would be easy to think that it would be very, very straightforward to get this level 8/7 hair up to a level 10 piece of cake, no worries. And in some instances it will be, but obviously if you promise everybody that it's going to be like that, then you're going to leave yourself in a lot of trouble sometimes. So it's definitely something to think about when you are doing a technique like this, or you are consulting for a color correction of this nature. But I mean, the great thing about this technique overall is it's massively simple. It just repeats itself over and over and over again. And that's the beauty of a very, very salon friendly technique. I think when you're looking at salon friendly, what you don't want is masses of technical element changes on each subsequent section, because it becomes very difficult to do in the salon when you're very, very first learning the technique. You can add new technical challenges once you fully understand these particular techniques. But in the instance of creating these techniques for you guys and thinking about the logical pathways that I want to follow as a stylist, I like to keep repetition of a technique to an absolute maximum. Because for me, not only does repetition mean that we can accurately produce good, consistent work if the technique's nice and simple and straightforward, we can fully focus on probably what is the most important part, is controlling saturation and making sure that we put good saturation onto the darker pieces. So many times I have been in classes, taught classes, where especially with balayage techniques, you know, there's spotting and splodging and blobs within that, and that is just basically, unfortunately, down to poor control of saturation. So as saturation plays an enormous role in these techniques, for me, it's just massively important that we concentrate really hard on creating beautiful, even saturation and blending. Once we do that, once we master that in this particular way, or whatever way that you decide is more akin to your style, we will be able to diversify in terms of technique and create new and different ways of mixing techniques. But if you're just starting out and you're just learning to balayage, or you're just attempting to balayage, then just stick to the really, really simple, repetitive techniques, whichever ones they are. They don't have to be mine. They can be anybody's technique. It is not important whose technique that you use. What is important is that you can use it. And that, my friends, is just the only way to get these techniques and translate them into real life. Is just take a technique, practice it, practice it, practice it, and then it will naturally evolve, because that's what we do. We're creative people. We think of different ways of conglomerating 2 or 3 different techniques into one specific technique. For instance, a couple of episodes ago, or actually the last couple of episodes, I've used 2 balayage techniques, 2 completely different balayage techniques, but I've combined them both with a face frame or a money piece. You know, that again has been massively important for people who maybe have picked up my techniques earlier on, been watching the channel for a while, and then maybe wanted some inspiration to bring together some of the techniques, to combine them to make something a little bit different. So I hope that gives you a better understanding of why I do these techniques and the way that I do these techniques, and why they're just really simple, straightforward techniques, because not everything has to be mega complicated. So we've moved from the back right through to the sides, and in terms of the pre-section for this, it was simply from the highest point of the head down to the back of the ear, split the head into 4 quadrants, and just simply work our way up the back in horizontal sections. And when I say split into 4 quadrants, I don't mean like actual 4 quadrants. It was simply split into 3 sections, 2 at the front, 1 at the back, and a horizontal section was taken, and then each one was subsequently split in the middle, so that I just worked on one side and then the other. Just a quicker, simpler way of working, rather than working all the way up one side and then all the way up the other. The back will take very evenly and consistently like that, and you'll get better results if they have got a reasonable amount of hair to work with. Because they've got a lot of hair, you do need to subdivide it a little bit further just to gain control of the hair. But you've guessed it, as we work up the sides of the head, it is exactly the same technique. Nice and simple, nice and straightforward. Horizontal sections, 1 to 1.5 inches in depth. Deep weaves all the way through the section to create little triangles of hair, or they might be rectangular dependent on the shape of your section, that you can then beautifully saturate and blend all the way up to the top of the head. Now, I've taught this method in real life a couple of times, and one of the questions that has always been asked is, can I take smaller sections? Well, of course you can. Of course you can take smaller sections, but I wouldn't go under 1 centimetre, because what you will then start to do is lose the contrast and the separation that you're trying to create with these particular techniques. Remember, a balayage through the ends of the hair, generally speaking, has got contrast between the ends and the lightness that you've created. So we really do need to bear that in mind as we work through these techniques. For me, it's super important when we are determining what is a balayage and what is an ombre, is that they are completely definable. I've done a video about it over on my channel. Go to the playlists, click on the colouring playlist, and it's probably 20 or 30, maybe 40 episodes back, but it's definitely there. And it talks about the differences between balayages and ombres, and they're definitely different. Obviously, we can bring the 2 techniques together and start manipulating and molding and creating something new, but them 2 techniques in their purest form are 2 completely different things. So we're nearly at the end of this technique, and we're just following it all the way up to the parting. We're always working in the natural parting, guys. Think about it. We want to be in the natural partings because we're going to see the most colour in that specific area. And the other thing that we really want to pay attention to in this specific instance is the size of the sections as we travel up to the parting. We probably don't want them to be at the 1.5 inch end of things as we get to the parting. They definitely want to be towards the inch side of things, because we don't want that massive, chunky, dark pieces through those top sections, whereas we can afford to do that a little bit more on the underneath. That's just something to think about as you travel up the head and you get up towards the highest point of the head near the crown. try and make your sections a little bit smaller. They don't have to go too small, unless you want a lot of blend and diffusion in that particular area. And then of course you can reduce the size of your sections, but 1 centimeter sections will be sufficient. You're only adding sections and therefore adding time to the technique. In terms of time, how long would this whole technique take? Probably around 40 to 45 minutes, and that's not really flying through the technique. I could definitely get it done quicker than that if I really, really wanted to. But, you know, in the essence of chatting and just being a friendly hairstylist, it's always going to add on a little bit of time. But it's a really quick salon-friendly technique, one that you can definitely use in the salon when you're allowed back, if you're here in the UK or anywhere else that's still in lockdown. But if you're in another part of the world, then go for gold. And here is the colour that we started with, just to remind you of what we started with, and this is the finished result. A really triumphant result, in my opinion. There's definitely work to do here, but we've cooled it down, we've created separation and contrast within the hair colour. And look, from a technical standpoint, if I sat here and scrutinised it, it's probably not the finest balayage in the world. But look, this is reality. This is what we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. We can't create those insta, glamorous, super platinum blonde colours all the time, because we have to do colours that are corrective and part of a journey. And so for me, it's about letting my ego go and just saying to you, this is what I get up to on a day-to-day basis. Not everything I do is ever going to be those $1 million money piece, glam. In fact, actually, that's so far from the truth. My clients are just very, very normal, lovely people to work with, but they generally don't have those waist length extensions and super bright money pieces. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And so I really like to share the realism of working as a salon stylist and creating a living for yourself from doing just very, very ordinary people's hair and charging them enough money to earn a very successful living out of. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode and you've found some insights and inspirations to go ahead and make your hairdressing day a better place to be. And in the next episode, I am very much looking forward to seeing you there. Have a good week.